Hello and welcome back to another edition of Civil Discussion on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever here with co-host Don Keelan. Don, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Andrew.
All right.
Great to be here.
Yeah, well, today is Monday, December 8th, so happy holidays to everyone. Hope hope the holiday season's off to a great start. So we're here to, kind of talk a little bit about some of the themes that we've been talking about on our show for the last few years, I guess it's fair to say. And then sort of shift gears a little bit and begin to kind of talk about a few specific issues. Mostly, I guess, ones that you could say would be statewide ones, education costs, and housing being two that we are hoping to address a little bit today. But Don, before we kind of get into that, I thought it'd be good just to kind of maybe remind ourselves a little bit about some of the ideas around civil conversation, because I've I think we've discussed with the help of several guests we've had some of the main principles about the importance of civil discussion, and I think everyone kind of at some level understands that, yeah, that's important to kind of listen to what other people are saying and try and see their point of view and all of that. Not that it means you necessarily have to, you know, agree with everything they're saying or anything like that, but to be able to, kind of listen without kind of getting into an argument within 5 seconds is kind of useful. And it seems like that's something we're not seeing enough of at the national level anyway. I mean, it seems like the quality of the rhetoric just seems to be continuing to be divisive and dismissive of the other side, whichever the other side is.
I fully agree with that, and it's gotten to be so that we've lost the ability to compromise and to find the middle ground, and those who try to get to the middle and are willing to accept that as a premise are chastised by whether the far left or the far right for moving in that direction. But the fact of the matter is that's always been the way it has. Legislation got passed is a compromise. It should work in the legislative sessions. It should, as it does in when you negotiate on many of the things that we have to negotiate on in the private sector. And particularly, for example, in mediation, no one really wins, but there's a resolution, and you move on. That's where I think we've lost here. We can't seem to move on. These issues that you raised at the state level, education, housing, and I'll throw in healthcare. They've been haunting us for 5 or 6 years now, if not more, and it's still not resolved. And let's see what's going to happen now in January when the legislature gets back, when the commission that was supposed to come up with a solution to present to the legislature under Act 73, they've turned the tables. So.
Yeah, well, I want to get into that a little bit, because it's such a hot button topic here in the state, and then, as you say, has been for a long time. I mean, you can take it all the way back to this, Act 60, back in, when was that passed? 1997, 1998, something like that. Almost 30 years ago, addressing a problem with education funding back then, and I don't know if the jury's still out whether or not that worked well or was an improvement over the system we had in place before then. But before we move on just completely from the whole civil discussion piece, because I do think it's worth kind of reminding ourselves a little bit about what's important. I ran across a post on Substack over the weekend that struck me as really summoning it up really well, and the writer said put out these 4 basic points. He had moderated a conversation around between one proponent of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s crusade, I guess, and someone who was opposed to that. And listening to that conversation, you kind of begin to think about why is it that it's so hard for people to kind of find common ground. And he put down these 4 points. One being listening to understand, not to reload. In other words, amp up your own point of view and fire back saying, no, you're wrong. you Two, seeking connection and not an immediate solution. In other words, trying to kind of again see what points you have in common, which and remarkably between the people that were on this panel, between the Maha and anti-Maha, there actually was some agreement that some of the initiatives that Secretary of Health Kennedy was attempting to do, they actually could around the processed foods, for instance. In this case, it was an area that it was worth finding a common ground on. Third, looking for islands of common ground instead of obsessing over the fault lines. And then fourth, sort of reiterating the best parts of the opposing argument. That just reminding yourself that okay, well, I mean, I don't agree with 100% of what this person is saying, but maybe there's 10 or 20 or 30% of that. Yeah, I can say, okay, I can live with that. I don't know. It just struck me like it's important to remember that even as we may not be having as many guests in and going forward that are going to be talking about sort of techniques of civil discussion as we've had, over the past what it's been now 3 years or so we've done the show. That some of those points are really important. And again, I guess I just find myself constantly, and it seems like almost daily, reading news reports of things happening at the national level in particular that make me go, wow, these guys need to read those 4 points before they go to the office in the morning.
Well, first of all, we're being swamped with news, whether it's at the international level with Gaza, Ukraine, the Venezuela issue, what's going on possibly in Africa, in Mali and Nigeria, what's going on in the Pacific, and obviously working with the European Union, working with NATO, all these international issues. Then we get the national issues, and that goes on. Then we have the state issues, and then obviously the local issues. So you wonder where do you you're almost it's a blizzard of information, and what side do I take? How do I digest all this? Getting back to your common ground and so forth. One of the things we learned in my experience in working with in divorce mediation and so forth, what we find with the couples, where is their common ground? What is it that they agree on, particularly on settlements, on the disposition of assets within the marital estate? And we make a list. Okay, all of this is agreed upon. Right? Okay, now let's filter out the issues that you don't agree on. Custody being one, maybe a major asset, maybe amount for child care and so forth. Okay, now let's take them one at a time, and see if we can come with to a compromise. Now, to start with, you had a lot of issues. But in reality, there's just a few that you really have to hone in on and work on, recognizing that no one's going to really win. And the problem is, we seem to have lost that. And the compromise is to surrender. And I'm not sure that's the answer.
Because that doesn't leave whoever's surrendering feeling like, oh, I guess I got taken to the cleaners on that one, and there's a resentment and anger and all the rest of it just lingers on and on.
Well, a good example of that, I think, was the recent government shutdown. When did it need to go on for 40 days, or I believe it was 40 days, when in fact it could have been resolved on the first day. In other words, not shut down. But the leaders who had the decision making were held hostage by the extremes on both sides, and I think we're seeing that today. That those who are willing to come together to find common ground are being blocked, or being held up, or being ransomed by the extremes on either side. And I think that's where we got to address the issue, because and as we get to the issues here locally or statewide, we'll find that's the case too.
Right, right. Yeah, well, we may have another government shutdown to look forward to in January, right? Because they only kicked the can down the road a couple of months, I think, on the last one. Some of them middle of January, I think. Anyway.
And the other side, if I may interject, while all of that is going on, imagine all the other issues that aren't being discussed.
Yeah.
And they're critical.
Good point.
So here our focus is on the shutdown and how to get that resolved, and all the damage that comes from a shutdown. But there's so many other issues that aren't getting discussed, that aren't being negotiated.
I had that exact thought many times over the course of the 40 days or whatever it was when the government was shut down. It's like, wait, you guys are spending all this energy on this. Meanwhile, housing, education, healthcare, affordability, or all the other issues that are out there, climate issues or international problems, Gaza, Ukraine, etc. Where's the energy going? It's minutiae around the shutdown instead of like these other problems that are real world problems that really matter.
Well, there's one that just to follow up, and then we could leave this. While we're focused on all these, the shutdown in Ukraine and Gaza and so forth, there's something going on in sub-Sahara Africa, and that's in Mali. Whether folks are following this, for the first time, Al Qaeda could very well be taking over a country. They were always have been there in different parts of various countries, but they never took control of a country. This could be the first time. And then they're worried about whether or not, if they got Mali, will they get Chad, I think it's called, will they get Western Africa, and possibly Nigeria. This is the same group whose origin brought us 9/11. So while all that is festering, we're over here worrying about the closing and keeping the government open, which and then when God forbid this were to happen, we'd have to go in and with the military into Africa. Why wasn't this getting resolved back here? Well, we think it wasn't getting resolved because the government was shut down. Yeah, we weren't. In other words, we weren't paying attention. Right. So go ahead.
Excuse me. Food for more conversations going ahead, but let's dive in then to some of the statewide questions that we wanted to talk about. So two seem to be kind of at the forefront here, although there's obviously many more than that. But we want to talk a little bit about the education and housing issues. So education has been a hot topic in the state now for a long time. I mean, but this past year, the legislature seemed to come up with an approach through Act 73 that would lead to more consolidation of the existing school districts. I mean, I think the number the governor talked about was maybe compressing them down to like 5 or 6 or maybe 10 large districts, down from, what do we have, 114 or something like that, I think, at the moment, and 50 some odd supervisory unions or something like that, which I think is worth noting that the approach here in Vermont is different from a lot of other places. I mean, most other states have a much more consolidated approach than we have. And I suppose that it's the product of the cherished idea of local control, where each town runs its own school district, more or less. That was an approach that may have sort of worked in a way, although it wasn't working too well since we passed Act 60 back in '67. in an attempt to kind of, which changed the funding formula of how states were, how the towns and school districts were financed. I mean, back then, as you recall, you go to town meeting, you'd pass you'd have a school budget that would be proposed by your local school district. Voters would say yay or nay, or amend it as it would, and you would walk out of the building knowing what your tax rate was going to be. But now the system is like, well, we come in, we pass a budget or we don't pass a budget. The bill goes to Montpelier, and the legislature they have to figure out how to pay for it all. And so we kind of have in some ways, we've developed, I think, a worst of both worlds kind of situation where the idea of local control is still very important to many people, and rightfully so. It's certainly, understandable. But at the same time, we have this sort of statewide approach to how we're going to finance it. So even a school district, opts to be, frugal and try to kind of really save money and keep taxes as low as they can. By the time that bill goes to the legislature and is melded in with all the others, and they have to come up with a fixed amount of money, that frugality that the local district was thinking about achieving is, not quite as, present as it was. So I guess I just find myself wondering, how are we ever going to get to a point where we fund schools as much as they need to be, because education is important. We now more than ever we need our kids to be going through school and learning, absorbing even more information than when you and I were in grade school. And yet it just seems to be a really challenging to find a way. How are we going to find a way to save enough money? Because the obvious answer is to consolidate, I would think. I mean, without having ever been on the inside of all of this, it just seems like, well, if you had 5, 10, or 20 school districts around the entire state, in theory, you'd be saving salaries on some of the administrative costs, and you could share services back and forth, so that every district doesn't have to have, certain people who are doing certain things that are being replicated in the next district over. You maybe could have one person who handles both districts. But I don't know. You've traveled in this area longer than I have, I think. So, I mean, what is your takeaway on why it is so hard for us to find consensus on how we can save money, which is what everybody wants to do, and at the same time providing schools the resources they need to educate our kids so that they're, near the top of the national test scores instead of sort of in the middle ground, which is what they seem to be at the moment.
Well, I want to get back to that. Unfortunately, we're not in the middle today, where we, but that's another issue. We'll cover it in a minute. I think it's important, especially for the viewers who may not have been here prior to 1997. Was it the Brigham decision that gave us Act 60? Up to that point, we had a foundation formula where each town did their own thing in raising money for schools. They didn't depend on the state unless they were a poor district. And the state then had what they call a foundation formula, and they would send money to various districts. Manchester received 0 prior to 1997, whereas Arlington, I think, got 12% of their budget from the state. Other districts got a heck of a lot more. The Supreme Court changed all of that.
Yes, it was the state Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Vermont State Supreme Court. And then out of that came that there was an inequitable distribution of funding for the states, whereas Manchester, the kids were getting all the money in the world, whereas other districts were getting very little money, and therefore the education quality was not the same. And under the Vermont Constitution, the quality is supposed to be the same, supposedly, is what I understand. So we have the state then took over the funding, and But prior to that, it appeared to be working, and the state would be providing the funding for those districts that could use a little bit more money. Right? That's all changed, and the problem now is uh, several things have happened since. We had 110,000 students then. We now have roughly 82 or 83,000 being in public schools. We have the budget went from around $1 billion. I think it's now $2.3 billion, the state education costs. Here we have less kids, but more cost. And the cost is being driven in large part by special education and by health care costs. And of course, pension and all that. Now, the legislature and the governor have been trying to get their arms around this, and then Act 73 was the, excuse me, the saving grace. A commission was appointed. The commission was to see to it if consolidation was to be the answer, then present to the legislature in January 3 distinct maps of how we would consolidate the schools, the school districts from 114, as you said, down to 5. Well, the commission said consolidation is not the answer because part of the problem is we don't have the data. We don't know if consolidation will save costs. And I don't know why they haven't worked on that issue. With all the tools we have today available to us.
Well, to say nothing of the fact that Act 46, which was passed what in 2016, 2015. I mean that was primarily about consolidation, right? You would have thought that in the course of developing that piece of legislation that there would have been a lot of data about how well if 2 districts merge together, then you only need maybe 1 superintendent, or you only need 1 person, 1 business manager, or the salaries alone would be a savings of some sort. There must have been some data around that.
I would think so. And the interesting thing is, or not interesting, but it's another factor to put in here. There are really 2 Vermonts when it comes to education. One is the rural Vermont. And then the other one is the more urban, where you have Franklin County, Chittenden County, I believe Washington, where they've got large school districts, and this is not an issue. They have the fund, they have the industry to fund the education. They have the large school districts. The school districts are offering a tremendous amount of services, but many places, obviously throughout the state, do not have that, and people want to have local control, and they don't want their children riding a bus for an hour to get to a school. And a good example now is that in your hometown of Sunderland. Imagine someone living on a half a mile from the Sunderland school on Sunderland Road, and they moved there because, look, our elementary school is a half mile from our house. Now that's closing, or I believe it's going to close.
That's pretty much.
And those children are going to go to Dorset, which I guess on a good day is about a 45-minute ride on a school bus. If you picked up at the southern end of the district.
Well, maximum, I think probably half an hour is a little more likely, but it may well be. I'm sure. Obviously, it's longer than the half.
I mean, I can drive. It takes me a half hour to drive from Arlington to the Morsill Road School. I think that's where the Dorset School is. But in any event, it's a major change. And the thing is, why isn't there compromise here? What's missing?
Well, I mean, what I'm not sure the compromise is what. I mean, you can't have the school open half a week, right? And the kids go and go someplace else. I mean, I guess I'm sympathetic to the folks who in whatever town, whether it's here in Sunderland or in Danby or other places around the state. You know, I guess it would be useful if school districts could say, well, if we leave things the way they are, your tax rate is going to be this. If we are able to consolidate and close the school here and close the school there and have the kids going into buildings that are, you know, as you said, you know, at one point, you know, they had a capacity for 400 or 500 students, let's say, and now, but now they only have 200. But when you close the school and send the other kids there, you're getting closer to that for you know, capacity that they were built for originally. Your tax rate is going to be, you know, X minus something. I mean, that might be, you know, one argument that people will be able to kind of absorb and say, well, okay, it's just the way it is at the moment. At least there'll be some offsetting benefit. I'm not trying to make the argument that, you know, taxes and, you know, amount of time on a school bus are the same thing and all that, but
Well, what's missing from the discussion, I think, is obviously we spend a lot of time on the financing, the financial side of it, but the other one is the quality. When you have a school that has 500 children, you can offer an art teacher,
Right.
you can offer music, you
Right.
can offer the industrial trades like carpentry and so forth.
or a school nurse if they're full time.
You're right, a school nurse and many of the other things. But when you have only 50 kids in that school, that's not available, and therefore the quality of education supposedly can be better provided by a larger school district, by a larger school. Do you lose the individuality of it, the personalization? Probably to a degree, but that gets overcome in time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think about, you know, is that in a lot of these small communities where a school is closing, at one point there were what, 4 or 5 one-room schoolhouses where kids went to school. They're all gone. They've been gone for a long time. I'm sure a lot of people couldn't even find them if the buildings are still there in the first place. I mean, times change, and I think, you know, people are able to adapt. But I think your point about, you know, the fact that in small schools they just aren't able to offer the same amount of options for kids is really important. And the other thing I think that's worth remembering is that small class sizes, I don't think anyway, are automatically a good thing. I mean, I think there is a point where if you're getting down to, like, let's say less than 10 kids in a class, you're not getting the same amount of classroom dynamics going on as you do when you've got 15 or 20 kids in a class. You know, maybe it'll be that you think the teacher can give more personal attention to each individual student when there's only fewer than 10, but the overall education experience, I think, suffers a bit when you've got a smaller number of kids and there's not the same amount of conversation that's happening.
Well, you take that a 40 or 50 enrollment school for 6th grade or 7 grades. That student has the same classmates or members of the school. Imagine the social ability, the social development that's missing here by not being in a school with a diverse population of 500-600 kids. That's missing. I want to go back to stay with the quality for a minute. One thing that's missing from this debate is the fact that what's happened to the quality. Now, recently, the results came out for 2024 about how the 4th graders in Vermont schools are doing. I don't know if you're aware of this. In 2015, Vermont was number 4th in the country. I believe Massachusetts had been first, Connecticut maybe second, New Hampshire up there very close, and math and reading, I believe. The 2024 results come out, and by the way, Mississippi, which we've always, you know, used
49th or 50th.
they were I think 37. Vermont is now 34th in the nation, and Mississippi is 7. Years ago, we used to say, well, Mississippi's down there because they're a very poor state. They have a lot of crime and so forth. Well, why are they now number 7 and we're number 37 or 34th? Right? And that's the quality issue. The other thing that's holding this up quite a bit, I believe, is the lobbyist. In Vermont, the largest union is the teachers union. It's 13,000 members. They have a lot of sway on the legislature of how the legislatures are going to vote. And of course, if you're a legislator and you come from a district where the teachers don't want you to go with this, whatever the program is, that carries a lot of weight, and it really impacts your judgment, is what I'm getting to say. So it's complex.
Yeah, it's hard, and I don't envy the legislators to with the task they have to come up with some way to kind of fix this. I mean, I think it clearly was a very contentious issue for all of them, from the governor to the legislatures on down last year or this past year, I should say. And it probably will be again, because it looks like they're going to have to go back and figure out, well, how do we resolve this question of the 3 maps that the commission was supposed to come up with, as opposed to this voluntary merger idea that they presented? Because without the maps, nothing else happens.
No.
I mean, Act 73 is like dead in its water, and I guess my feeling is I kind of understand where the task force is coming from with the idea of voluntary mergers, but as you well know, not too many school districts are interested in voluntary mergers.
No.
I mean, if Arlington was asked to merge with another district voluntarily,
No.
I'm sorry, that would never happen.
No.
I don't think.
But the dollars are limited. There's only a certain amount of dollars that are available for education because there's so many other issues that the state has to fund. The dollars are never unlimited, and the Act 73, which we've been referencing, had its origins because the year before, the state had a 14% increase, and that was it actually, I think, impacted the Democratic Party having a majority in the legislature.
Yeah.
There was a revolution, if you will, a mini revolution, and therefore the legislature last year came up with Act 73. All right. Now we
after
have
coming out with ways to pay down that 14%, or actually I think it was even higher than that. It started off at 18 or 19%, I think was the original projection, and they brought it down, so to speak, by finding money from one place or another. But
well, that was last year.
Yeah, those are one-year solutions.
What we're going through now has been subsidized by a major drawdown from the general fund and the use of reserve funds. That's not going to happen next year. And I believe it's the state finance officer came out with a projection the other day that the next school year, the school taxes are going to go up 12%, actually 11.9. Now, can that change? Sure, but what's not available are reserve funds. So here we are now, back to where we were 2 years ago. And it goes back to what you're saying, kicking the can down the road. So
yeah, well, it's hard to know. So we're kind of running out of time here, Don. But we did want to talk briefly about housing. I'm not sure if it's possible to talk briefly about housing. We may need to kind of take this for our next show. But I know this is an area you're very interested in and know a lot about. So I guess for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, do we want to explore that a little bit, or do we want to just say let's wait till next time? Well, I mean, housing, I guess, like the education piece that we've just been talking about, is another area that is frequently pointed to as being a problem the state has. We're not the only state that has it, but there's a shortage of housing, particularly a shortage of affordable or workforce housing, shortage of housing that younger families can afford, for starter homes or the first home. Uh, again, just sort of, we're just going to scratch the surface, I guess, on this one. But what do you see any silver bullets out there that could be used to, sort of make a quick start or making a dent in the housing shortage that the state has? Or is this like a problem where there is no one silver bullet out there that's the solution is multifaceted and getting there? And again, much like with the education issue, this has been a question, I'm sure we could go back 10 or 15 years and find all kinds of news stories about there's a housing shortage. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And here we still are.
Yeah. Here we still are is right. In the way, there's a bit of an analogy between housing and education. You have the rural area and the urban area. Now, the housing is being built up in Chittenden and Washington County and Franklin County for the most part. It's not being built at that scale and where it's needed in other places. And part of it is many of the rural areas do not want to change. They want to leave things the way they are, and they just don't want that housing. Even though we obviously we're paying the price for it by not having the housing to bring people in to fill jobs. I mean, a good example: the hospital brings in our local hospital spends millions of dollars every year on what they call travelers. Travelers is a cost where they can't get a nurse locally, so they have to go to a national bureau and get someone to come to Vermont, come to Bennington, to work for 3 months.
And they cost more.
3 times, 3 times at the cost of paying someone locally. And I can go through so many different organizations, whether it's healthcare, business, the retail, tourism, not tourism, retail, hospitality. They're all looking for employees. But where's the housing?
Yeah.
And then when you, from a developer standpoint, it's not just the housing. Where's the infrastructure to build the housing?
The water lines, the sewer lines, and all of that, yeah.
And many towns, and I've written about this, they've had the ability to build sewers. They've had the funding available to them from the federal government and the state portion, and they have to approve a small portion of the bond. They don't want to do it. Even though they have the money available to them to build a wastewater system within their village and so forth, they turned it down. And there's a series of towns up in central Vermont. We don't want that because we don't want change.
And what's their argument for not wanting that?
Because we don't want those people here. I mean, a good example.
If we built the infrastructure, we build the sewer lines, build the water lines, that means it's easier for a housing developer to come in, put up a 30, 40, 50 unit housing project, and
yeah,
there goes the neighborhood. Is that the thinking?
Say that again?
And there goes the neighborhood.
Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. And we had, was it a few months ago, I think in September, a 25-unit project in Putney, Vermont, finally got started. They've been working, it was a nonprofit organization to build this. Half of it, of the 25 units, were going to be affordable. The other half was going to be workforce housing or what we call market rate housing. 25 units being built by a nonprofit organization and land in the village. It's going to be a $15 million project for 25 units. It's $600,000 a unit. It was held up for, it took 5 years to get the start to where they were able to break ground. 2 of those years, they were in court and spent $2 million because the neighbors blocked the project. Right? That, you know, as a developer, you can go through all the approvals, and it's very costly and very time-consuming to do that. So, okay, so you do it. And then you get the approvals from whether it's the local approvals, the state approvals, or in some cases you need federal approval. And then you get a lawsuit by a neighbor blocking the project. Why would you bother?
All right. Well, that's been a problem, I'm sure, for for a lot of folks who go, hey, why do I want to go through that? And then even if they're successful at the end after the 5 years, and the 2 years in court, now they spent how many millions of dollars on attorney's fees or court costs, and somehow know that expense has to be recaptured in the cost of what you're going to sell the houses for, or what they're going to be rented for.
Well, there's a solution that occurred back in this early 80s in New Jersey, when many of the towns, very similar to Manchester, Dorset, Arlington, refused to build housing or zone for housing, and yet they needed the housing because there was a lot of office complexes moving out of New York City to New Jersey. The state Supreme Court, in the very famous real estate law decision, it's called the Mount Laurel decision, ordered towns to build housing, that they had to have zoning for the housing, and there were going to be no blockage by anyone, by the town or by neighbors. This town is going to have 200 units of this kind of housing, whether you like it or not. And I know, because I did 900 units in Chatham. We were zoned for 700. The court, and they were giving us a hard time. The Supreme Court in New Jersey said, you're going to do 900 homes here, 50 of which would be available for civil servants within the community. And if you can't get the local, the Chatham community, you go to the contiguous towns of Baskin Ridge, Morristown, and I believe Harding, and Summit, and you don't want that to happen, but New Jersey was really dragging their feet, and they needed housing, and actually there was a second decision, Mount Laurel too. But in the real estate business, when there was a lot of objection to housing, the court stepped in, and I hope Vermont doesn't get that far, but it seems to me it's going to be what might be needed. Now I know I have a lot of people will object to me, and but at the same time, as a developer, when you go into a town, you like to know that the town wants you to build this project. And what we used to always do too is we would go to the neighborhood. All right, what are your issues with this project before we even filed anything? Okay, and let's see if we can accommodate your issues. All right, and the thing we always would hope for, whether it would be with the leaders of the zoning board, the planning board, the design review board, or the neighbors, is intellectual honesty. Don't tell us you don't like the color or the paint on the building, when the fact of the matter is you don't want the project at all. And that's what's missing. I see that.
Yeah, well, that may be a good place for us to kind of just put a pause on this conversation, which I think there's much more to talk about. But I think your point that you just made there about going to talk to the neighbors and saying, hey, look, we'd like to put this there. What are your feelings about it? What are your concerns? And have those conversations before any shovels hit the ground or anybody goes to the local zoning office to see if this is a permitted use or whatever. I often find myself wondering, are those conversations, do they happen, in most cases? I mean, I'm sure they happen sometimes, but, it would be really, I think, important if a developer has an idea to put up whether it's a 25-unit housing unit or 125 units, to go to the neighbors who are within eyeshot of where it's going to be and say, what are your feelings about this? Are you going to be outraged? Are you going to be okay with it? I often find myself wondering if that's part of the initial approach that a lot of developers would take.
Well, in many cases it is, and you listen to the neighbors, and they may say, look, and a good one was Ormsby Hill. The developers at Ormsby Hill here in Manchester, in 1986, came to Hildene and asked Hildene, what is it that you may like or not like about our project? And I remember Hildene, and I was involved in it at that time. I was not up here full time, but they called me in to advise them. Hildene asked them that no building at Ormsby Hill could be seen from the gardens at Hildene. So if you stood in the gardens at Hildene and you're looking over to Mount Equinox, you wouldn't see rooftops. So when our company later on took over the project, and that's a whole nother story, but we took over the project. Here I am now involved as a trustee of Hildene. I'm owner of the company doing Ormsby. We ran what we call a balloon test to accommodate our neighbor. And what we did was every of the 21 buildings here, we put up a balloon to show the highest point of the roof. And then we went back to Hildene, and if Hildene could see any balloons, we lowered the elevation of that building to accommodate them. We also kept away from the back road of Hildene. And then we also, as good neighbors, we gave Hildene an easement so that cross-country skiing could come on Ormsby Hills property and then make a U-turn, or not a U-turn, go out another road, another path backwards. My point is, you can work with people, and as a developer, you want to do that, assuming that the neighbors are going to be reasonable. If they're going to be unreasonable and they outrageous with some of their requests, then you're going to have to either, well, we're going to charge ahead here, or we're going to go to another town. And many times we've gone other places. But it's very clear to me, and it's why the company doesn't build housing in Vermont anymore, is that it's just impossible, because you don't know if you're ever going to get approved.
Right. Well, there's so much more to unpack here. There's the whole not in my backyard question we were talking about a little bit before we went on the air. There's just the sheer costs of building housing nowadays, and construction costs and labor costs that are much higher than what they used to be. And there's many other factors, I'm sure. At the same time, we have a lot of people who would like to buy housing, would like to live in Vermont, would like to live in this area, but when they get offered a job or could maybe would want to live here for some reason, they come here for a weekend and say, "Wow, this is great," but there's no place for them to live that they can afford. So we're missing out on a lot of things because of the fact that there's just not enough housing in the price range that there should be. But I'm going to suggest we kind of leave it there for today, because there's much more to unpack, I think, and let's plan to do that in the next show.
Can I leave it one point?
Sure.
And that is a good benchmark for the leaders of communities to follow. How many of your employees live in your town? And who work for the municipality, and also who work for organizations within the town? How many can afford to live in the town they work in? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Right.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Okay. And Merry Christmas to all of you, too. Hope you found our conversation interesting, and, well, we'll be back sometime in 2026, I guess.